We became a top 1% podcast in just 21 weeks.
It's true. Industry data suggests that only 1% of podcasts ever make it past episode 21.
9 out of 10 podcasts don't even make it past episode 3, meaning this is a pretty big deal.
So today, to celebrate this milestone, we're going to reveal how we've done this so far. Over the past 20 weeks, we've had the privilege of sitting down with incredible guests who've shared unique insights into the evolving world of college athletics and the NIL era.
From the #1 public university's director of NIL, Justin DiTolla, to one of the biggest YouTubers in the world like Ian Gunther, and future NBA draft pick athletes like Sion James, we've explored everything from revenue distribution and roster caps to the realities of creating a personal brand.
And with the ever-changing landscape of college sports, think antitrust lawsuits, creative athletes, and university leadership reshaping athletics, we'll highlight key takeaways from these episodes. Plus, we'll connect the dots to help student athletes and their supporters continue to maximize their NIL potential. But before we do that, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so that you never miss another episode.
With that being said, we hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back to the NIL Era podcast. My name is Elise Byun.
And I'm Fernando Andrade. We just hit 20 episodes in 20 weeks, and just like we did after the first 10 episodes, we want to do a bit of a recap for the previous 10 episodes that featured so many amazing guests with unique knowledge and experience. To start us off, we want to talk about episode 19, which featured Cal Athletics Director of NIL, Justin DiTolla. He spoke about, wearing many different hats in this role, one being part of the conversation about how these revenue distributions are going to work. We've talked about revenue distribution quite a lot, but what do you think this will look like, or what schools should do moving forward?
I think it's hard to predict what schools will decide how to distribute the revenue in terms of percentages. But I think just contextually, we can bet that a majority of it will be going to football. And then from there, you're going to get your basketballs and I think potentially volleyball teams being somewhat in that revenue share. I think the power conferences have apparently distributed a potential formula for how they propose revenue to be distributed, but it's still very much so in the air. I think something that hasn't been really talked about and is now very much so being talked about in terms of what this revenue share looks like is the roster caps. The roster cap this conversation is something that has been coming up recently at both the institutional and conference level. And I think that's something that Justin DiTolla is also heavily involved in. We saw sports being cut during COVID times. Stanford, for example, cutting 11 sports, but of course later bringing them back. This is for sure the biggest fear in terms of what comes next for college athletics. We've had this discussion many times ourselves, both of us being Olympic sports student athletes, myself being a female sports student athlete, yourself just being such a fan of Olympic sports in general. And I think with the House settlement and what the current landscape is, that is a very valid and a very real concern. Ohio State's athletic director stated that they will do everything they can to retain all 36 sports programs at their institution. But further from that, they said they will retain the scholarships they already provide for those 36 sports. I think that is something that is very important and very interesting to publicly say, because with the House settlement and the roster caps, but also no scholarship caps, a lot of people are saying, great, everyone can be on scholarship. That is that's not going to happen. I think a bigger fear is scholarships will be taken away because now they don't have to hit that 13 full ride scholarships for the team. If you're able to, I don't see why you wouldn't, but also in this revenue sharing era, costs are going to try and be cut in any capacity that there is. I'm glad the Ohio State AD publicly said this because there was some discourse on Twitter, specifically around gymnastics, saying that they will be cutting the men's gymnastics scholarships. So I'm very glad he publicly said we are not going to be doing that. He also makes it a point that most schools will not have the capacity, or it will be at least very hard for schools to keep all sports. fully fund those existing scholarships and revenue share in the future. I think great athletic directors and great athletic departments will find a way to do all three. I want to know that many schools were able to preserve all sports during COVID times. At Cal, our athletic director, Jim Knowlton, that was his top priority of preserving all 30 sports at Cal. And I think this is why roles like Justin DiTola are in these conversations. It's that NIL aspect of how can we maximize revenue so we can be able to participate in every part of this new era, but still preserve these opportunities, because that, at the end of the day, that is what they are trying to do. They want everyone to experience being a student athlete at the highest level. And I totally understand that. I am just doubtful that, like I said before, schools will increase scholarships like the settlement says it can. But I also think it's possible that more student athletes can be on scholarship. What I mean by this is that scholarships will now be changing from headcount to equivalency scholarships for all sports. So, for example, there's a couple sports that are headcount: gymnastics, football, basketball. Those are headcounts. Volleyball, I believe, as well. So now all 20 of your women's gymnasts can be on a scholarship, maybe not on a full ride, but they all might get, let's say, room and board and books covered. So now you're kind of spreading the wealth, being able to do an equivalency kind of model there.
I mean, this is something we talked about with Justin and that I brought up in that episode for sure. But I think the biggest issue that any athletic department is facing in the NIL era is this moral dilemma of how can we maximize revenue, but at the same time preserve all these opportunities for all the different student athletes already in the athletic department. Personally, I don't think that's possible. And that's sad because you have on one side this business opportunity and on the other your values. And this isn't something based on the episode, but as a Cal alum, it's something I feel. I personally think Cal is in this tricky spot where you have your values that you hold so close and dear to your heart. It's what makes Cal so special, which is an opportunity for all these different teams, right? There's not that many athletic departments in the nation that have 30 teams. That's truly special, especially when you consider how many of those are actually top programs. With that being said, is that a smart financial decision? It's not. It's not. The only way some programs are going to survive is if they get endowed. We've seen this with men's and women's golf. 25 million got donated. We've seen this previously with baseball. We've seen this, I believe rugby is also fully endowed. So you've seen it with different programs, right? And it is possible. But if that's not going to happen, I cannot imagine that there's many athletic departments across the nation that will be able to afford this. And it brings up the moral dilemma of, do I want to provide 50% opportunities for all these 30 teams, or do I want to go 100% all in to only 15 of them? Do I want to be the number one athletic department in the nation with 15 teams, or do I want to be complacent and mediocre with 30? And that's difficult, right? Because quite frankly, if that were me right now still playing for men's soccer, I'm not sure if I would have this opportunity. And that changed my life. 100% changed my life. And I'm so grateful for it. But I'm not sure if it's the best thing for a Cal Athletics, for example. And this is true for so many different athletic programs across the nation. So I think it's a huge pickle. I think it's a moral dilemma. And it's something that we'll have to see where the university's values lies for not only Cal specifically, but plenty across the nation.
And I think that is an such a true point right there, because it affects everything from there. If you are spreading the wealth between 30 versus all in on the 15, if you are all in the 15, you are able to recruit, you are able to retain, you are at the next level. And that is what Cal, Stanford, all of these other athletic departments, they are going to struggle. One of the sports, or two of the 11 sports that Stanford cut, were sailing and synchronized swimming. So it's very hard to argue that you need those sports. Those are 100%, they're young adults on those teams developing both in and outside of the gym. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know many like athletic departments that have those sports. So when we're in this new era, do you focus on the core sports that most other programs have so you can stay competitive? I think it very much so is a daunting question that all these athletic departments are 100% thinking of. I think this is also just a harsh reality for roster management. I know we've had chats off camera just about what these roster numbers really mean, but just anecdotally within the women's gymnastics space, there are speculations that coaches are offering full ride scholarships to more than the current NCAA limit. So they're just really banking on the fact that this part of the settlement is approved. That's one side of it. We're talking about the athletic departments that are able to potentially give even more scholarships. Obviously, that is not the reality for most. But on the other hand, you're also seeing the roster limit affecting recruiting of PSAs, so those high school recruits. From Penn State women's soccer, there's a PSA named Taylor Wilson who was verbally committed to the Nittany Lions, but ultimately had her roster spot rescinded due to that new cap. The women's soccer cap is at 28 players. I again am also acknowledging that the real time updates that are happening right now. So if I don't have too much information here, please excuse me. But as of today, when we are recording, November 13th, it is also signing day for D1 athletes, not including football and basketball. So this also means it is the start of a very new era of the future of college athletics. Yahoo Sports reports that over the last few days, the school, about Arizona, University of Arizona, has distributed revenue sharing contracts to recruits ahead of the start of the early signing period. We discussed the elimination of the NLI and entering a new phase of the NIL agreements, of those revenue share agreements. We've anticipated this to happen, but again, loopholes are inevitable. To reiterate, many people believe that the revenue share cap within the House settlement of the $20 million just replaces one cap with another. But I think more importantly, the clearinghouse of the collective deal regulation of basically vetoing any collective deal over X amount of money violates rules. So that's like that collective part of the settlement that the judge and the plaintiffs and all the lawyers involved have a lot of discussion over. And now there's word that collectives are planning to front load deals to find a way to pay athletes more than within the allotted kind of time and amount of money before the scheduled July 1st, 2025 implementation of the House settlement rules. So, what does this mean? This means that schools can rely on their collectives to sign players to short term deals that pay them. Let's say it's a football recruit. Let's say they can be paid from January to June instead of waiting to pay throughout the year in fear of these collective deals being vetoed. The Florida State athletic director says it's the 1 year to manipulate the cap. But again, this is all contingent on whether the collective clearinghouse, so that veto process or not, gets approved, which personally I think is an interesting part of the settlement. And I think it will, that's the part that will be looked at a lot, because I think that's the part that still violates a lot of the antitrust situations.
Just to emphasize on the rhetoric being used, manipulate the cap. Manipulate. I've talked about it previous episodes. That's where I have that issue, right? And that's just why I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have these rules laid out in writing, because, and I wanted to say this last time, I think that we all know, we can use silly examples, right? There's that silly example in life of, if you wouldn't do it in front of your grandmother, don't do it, right? And it's like, oh, we're saying that we're going to manipulate things. We aren't fully admitting what we're going to do. We're going to keep it right here in secret. We're going to not tell the truth. That's like, that to me is the biggest red flag of, one, openly admitting that you need to manipulate, and two, just not telling the truth. Something's fishy if you're not telling the truth. So yeah, I mean, do I understand why they're going to do that from January to June? Totally. I think anybody in that business space would do it, right? You'd be dumb not to. It's just another reminder of how important it is to level the playing field for all these different schools moving forward. And I don't know. I mean, I'm curious your take for gymnastics. You brought up this women's soccer example. For men's soccer, yeah, the cap is going to be a thing, and for soccer, it's the same thing. 28 for both men's and women's. So players are going to get cut, and these are players that were already committed to this team, that are already on the team. Some that may even be on scholarship potentially, probably not, but potentially, and they're just going to get kicked out for no reason other than this ruling. It's not because the coaches are saying we don't want you here. It's not because they're not helping the team. It's simply because there's a limit, and you were the 29th guy or the 30th guy, and you were playing a big role as a 30th guy, but now you're not. And just to provide context, right? I think this is the largest roster Cal men's soccer has ever had, which is the program I played for, which is like, I think they're at around 40 right now, but they've had so many injuries that 40 is barely doing it for them. Like, they've had anywhere from 10 to 15 injuries at the same time. It's an entire bench of injuries. So this limit, like this roster, has helped them so much to the point that they're playing at this time, right? On Wednesday, they're playing the ACC semifinal tomorrow, and potentially the final by the time this is out. Hopefully, the final by the time this is out. But that's what helped them, right? Otherwise, they would have never survived. And now you're going to see all these guys get cut for no reason other than this ruling. So I don't know. I'm curious if gymnastics will have that.
Well, first, 40 is insane. Like, I can't even imagine having 40 teammates. That's wild.
But at the same time, like, there's so many teams that have done it previously. Like, Cal women's soccer has had 40 for such a long time. Like, that they have. And it's obviously, it's weird if you're on a soccer team in general. Like, the pros don't have 40, but all 40 do play a role. I'm not saying that's okay. I think 28 is a fantastic number, and I think that is the appropriate cap. But to have to cut some of these players from one season to the next and just saying, look, man, sorry, like, they're forcing my hand, I think that's a bit sad personally.
I think that is sad. It's very unfortunate because, like you said, they didn't do anything wrong. It's not like the coach doesn't want them there, all of that. Like, even with this PSA and her commitment to Penn State, in the article, it's saying that the Penn State women's soccer coach calls her crying. Like, a coach doesn't want to do that either. It's just kind of where we're at right now. I think on the flip side, not that you see it with scholarships, but I have teammates from club who couldn't commit to their dream school because that program didn't have a full ride for them. They might have had a half scholarship 2 years, but not 4. So it's like, to me, it's like it's just unfortunate that the way the implementation of new rules are happening and it's affecting the PSAs who didn't have those rules before. Like, it's just a kind of unfortunate, but at the end of the day, it's going to happen at some point. So it's just happening now, and we get to discuss about it. I'm hoping that this recruit who committed to Penn State, I'm hoping she can find a different opportunity. If you're going to compete in Big Ten women's soccer, I assume you're pretty damn good. So I have hope for her, and I really hope she finds a different opportunity. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to look at. I think in women's gymnastics, it's different for our team. We notoriously have a very small roster. Like, last year we had 15, year before that we had like 14. So we utilize a small roster and we use it to our advantage. LSU's team had 20 plus girls. So I think for that, and when you look at LSU's collective, they got the best girls out of the transfer portal. There was a girl from University of Florida, amazing gymnast. She did her 5th year at LSU. Everyone's confused on how they got 2 grad transfers from Utah, great gymnasts. all of them went to LSU because they had so much collective money. They grabbed every great grad transfer, every great transfer out of the portal, because who wouldn't want all that money, compete at LSU, all this stuff. So they had like 23 of the most stacked roster, I think, in the entirety of the NCAA. So now it's leveling out the competition there. I think an access of resources of the top, you are able to recruit somewhat of the same level, and you're not going to have these super teams of, let's say, for men's soccer, let's say you were to have a super team of like 35 guys. We're kind of distributing a little bit.
I can understand that, how it'll start to even out the playing field for the collective involvement in sports. You know, like now that a collective is involved and now that you can literally pay these guys to all come to your team to kind of keep it fair, I guess that roster cap helps in that sense, at least with your example for LSU, right? But I think the important message and the important reminder for all of these people is it's the same message for the athletic departments. It's just a micro example of it. In the same way that athletic departments will have to decide whether they want 30 okay teams versus 15 top teams within their department, coaches are now going to have to do the same with these roster limits of, all right, I'm not going to have the opportunity to give all these kids a shot on my team, but I will treat the best of the best incredibly, right? They'll most likely all have scholarships in one way, shape, or form. If they have the money for it, there will be more full rides. So that's great. But I think it's an important reminder as well that with this great privilege comes great responsibility, because there are so many kids that would now literally want to be in your spot that could have been this year that just won't be able to moving forward for this exact rule change of a reason. So I think it's an important reminder, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out competitively moving forward. I think one of our favorite episodes that we recorded in these past 10 was for sure with John Balcom, from Hoyas Rising, right? The director of that collective from Georgetown. John talked about the 3-win mentality, which is the book he has, the agency he runs, all these different things. It's all on this 3-win mentality philosophy, but also about the different types of athletes. And he really emphasized the term and perspective of the creative athlete. Could you talk a bit about this and why you think it's really important to monetize as a creative athlete?
The creative athlete, just to re-emphasize, is an athlete who can differentiate themselves from other athletes and other peers. And you're not trying to outdo anyone else, but instead you're paving your own way and your own audience. To me, hearing this and just being able to record that amazing episode with John, this just reminded me of Ian Gunther from episode 12 and his NIL experience. Just looking at Ian's like rise to fame within the NIL and men's gymnastics world, he has differentiated his content, making it unique to not only his experience as a men's gymnast, but also at Stanford. I think because I was a women's gymnast at Cal, like our circle is pretty small, gymnastics circle is small, but seeing what he's been able to do with his platform for the sport and just also pertain to a large audience was super interesting. My cousin, who's a couple year older than us, but played water polo at LMU, he'd sent me Ian's TikTok and was like, "This guy's funny," and I was like, "Yeah, like I know him." And he goes, "How do you know him?" And I'm like, "It's a small world, but it's also funny that content is able to reach so many different people." And I think for a pretty interesting sport that men's gymnastics is, seeing what Ian was able to do as a creative athlete was super interesting, and being able to tag kind of a name to it now as creative athlete. But for the student athletes listening, I think this is so important for you to figure out what your niche is, whether it's coming back from an injury or just showing what you're passionate about, or even producing content that no one else is doing. That's the start of creating your niche. And I've said it before, but you don't have to be the best on your team to do it. I think that's very important and often a barrier for a lot of student athletes is I don't get playing time. I ride the bench. Like, no one cares, da da da. But it's like, you have a very unique story and a very unique experience no matter what sport you play, no matter what school you're at, what division, what conference, whatever. It is a very unique experience that people want to see. And yeah, you can pave your own way and you don't have to do what everyone else is doing.
A reminder that being different is better than being better. And we will be talking about that with our upcoming guest in the next episode as well. So stay tuned for that. But more broadly, and just within this context, I think we tend to talk a lot about these huge deals, right? We were talking about this AJ Devonsa kid last episode of how he's getting offers for like $4 million or $4.5 million to go to BYU, I think it is, and Nike signing him for like north of 3 million, and all these different deals. We've talked about it with Sion in his episode, how he was offered like high six-figure deals from collectives, all these different things. But I think we tend to forget that sure, there all are these deals at the highest level, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone. And actually, it's not even the case for the majority of student athletes in the NCAA. So while we often talk about NIL at this highest level and the connotations that may come with it, whether that's pay for play or the lawsuits that come along, at the end of the day, I think it's an important reminder that NIL truly is for everyone.
And I think hearing this from John also reiterated for myself the different levels of NIL. I think the biggest misconception is that everyone wants to participate in NIL. When I was still in school, personally, I didn't have the time or energy to also go out and get my own NIL deals. Like, I was not the stars athlete on my team. Like, no one was coming knocking at my door, and I did not have the time or energy to go knock on anyone else's door. I think it's just being realistic with yourself. And that's also why I loved the episode with John, his candor about what the reality is for many athletes surrounding NIL. Like, no, you probably won't be a Livy Dunn, but there's so many different opportunities out there if you're willing to hustle for them and put in the work that no one else is doing.
Shifting to episode 16 with our guest there being Liam Anderson, we touched on university presidents and athletic directors in that episode. Not too often are we seeing university presidents retire or step down, but there has been some movement there. So, I mean, it's again kind of interesting with the timing and all of this happening right now. So, what are we seeing with this movement? Why are presidents and ADs retiring right now?
So, USC President Carol Folt is retiring in July 2025. When you look at Folt's impact on USC athletics, this can help us understand the president's role in college athletics. Because we've also talked about it a little, but it's kind of easy to separate both of them, especially at the student athlete level and us being alums. Like, it's not like we saw the Cal president every single day. Um, and it's I think hard to understand that relationship. But just looking at Carol Folt and the USC impact there, since the start of her tenure in 2019, she has really reshaped Trojan athletics, and that being one of her top priorities. She had already overseen the resignations of two athletic directors and the remarking of a department reeling from that Varsity Blues scandal. It was also Folt who, quote, closed the door on Pac 12 expansion to then lead USC to the Big Ten Conference less than a year later. So she was a big part in the Pac 12 media rights deal coming to that room of presidents, and her being, this is not for USC. We are not going to be a part of this media rights deal. She was the one leading that charge. Most notably, she also signed off in November 2021 on hiring football coach Lincoln Riley, a move that costed USC upwards of $10 million per year. And then further from that, even promised to fund the construction of what would become the Bloom Football Performance Center. So more facilities and all of that in order to lure Lincoln Riley to campus. From there, Carol Folt hired Jen Cohen, the university's first female athletic director, to replace Mike Byun in August 2023. And after more than a year at the helm, Cohen appears to have stabilized USC's athletic department. Jen Cohen came from UW, and she did that move after moving Washington into the Big Ten themselves. So a lot of movement just looking at USC athletics kind of history there, and a lot of it coming from the president level. And especially, I think that big move of obviously the Pac 12 to the Big Ten for USC that triggered a lot of movement there in itself. So the presidents do have just such a huge impact. So when you see a president retire, step down, things like that, even Cal's athletic director, I'm not athletic director, sorry, president retired last academic year. So this is a new president this academic year. People were saying, is this new president going to clear house? Are we going to get a new athletic director? Same kind of conversation at Stanford when they got a new president. So there's a lot of things that happen that you don't really know who the power lies with, I think is interesting until you really look at who's in those rooms, who's in those conversations.
It definitely depends on which university you're talking about, but I think the biggest misconception in athletic departments is that the AD is the one calling the shots. That's just not true. It's either the chancellor, president, whatever you want to call that person that's the leader of the university. They are the ones that make the big financial decisions. They're the ones that have to sign off on all of these things to take place. For example, the Pac 12 wouldn't be dead if it weren't for that university president from USC, right? Like that's the person that starts it. It's not the AD, it's the president, it's the chancellor. And I think the more we can look at that, the better of an understanding we'll have as to how universities function because they have to deal with all of these different arguments and debates of we need money for academics and we need money for athletics. And it's so funny being in the position that I am as a former student athlete, but then currently a grad student. I've heard both sides of the debate of we need more money for athletics and why the hell are we giving money to athletics? We don't need that. This is a university and they're taking away from our education. I hate that argument with my entire heart, but it's something I've heard and they have to call those shots. They're the ones that make those decisions. So I think it's timely to look at USC. Cal just had their chancellor be replaced. What other schools are we seeing? Is there any other big movement going on at the moment?
I think Cal and Stanford, just off the top of my head, happened this past year. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I know on the Stanford front, they didn't get Alston money for the longest time because the old president was very anti giving student athletes an extra benefit. So this new university president, I'm pretty sure, said that they will give out the Alston payments to student athletes. They also said that and haven't rolled it out last time I heard about it. So we'll see if I'll ask some Stanford student athletes to see if they're getting their Alston payments, but those are the little nuances that university presidents, they have the final call on it there.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Alston money again, are you going to sacrifice your academic values as Stanford University, right? Like paying student athletes to have good grades at such a top academic institution sounds pretty weird. It's almost like you're wasting money because you know that these student athletes will be qualified to earn this money. Like you're giving away freebies, right? And but at the same time, how far can you stick to your values, right? I think about the Ivy League, for example. How long will they be able to stick to their value of no athletic scholarship? I don't know how long that's going to last. Like, can you be competitive with that?
I think the Ivy League is just such an interesting conference and or just it's such an interesting place to be because they don't have collectives. They don't have that many people transferring in and out because it's hard to. And then like the no athletic scholarships, like there's so many things and it's the history of it. They're never going to have conference realignment ever. if you think about it. Like that's crazy that they are kind of immune to a lot of things that happen because of the way it's run, just like historically. Um, I don't think we're ever gonna see Ivy League student athletes, even for a second, be considered athlete student. Like I think that is probably the one conference. Like they're not. Like they will die on the hill that they are a student before athlete because they can't get in if their grades weren't good enough. Like Stanford is semi the same ish, but like Ivy League student athletes, you had to have like that 36 on the ACT. Like you couldn't not kind of thing. So I think that's kind of the one conference that is kind of special.
Yeah, I mean, they're so weird because it's like they are the most relevant, irrelevant conference, if that makes any sense. Like everybody knows what the Ivy League is, but nobody really cares. Like you're not looking at them for their athletics. Their programs are pretty irrelevant across most sports, and yet they're somehow relevant to top of mind just because of their academics. So I wonder what's going to happen there. Will they just stick to their values and not care about their athletics moving forward? Or will they at some point say, you know what, we want to be athletically competitive as well, and we're going to have to give in because they don't have any grad student athletes. They don't have athletic scholarships. They don't have collectives. They'll never have conference realignment. So how does that work?
It's interesting to also see like what sports they really prioritize because at the end of the day, you do still prioritize some sports over others. So it's like they will prioritize like the rowings, like Harvard rowing, the legacy there. They will prioritize that. Um, I'm interested to see if they like the up and coming sports of like the volleyballs and all of that. But yeah, it's interesting for sure because obviously the Ivy League still recruits amazing student athletes. Like even looking at the Olympics, like so like a lot of the great student athletes were Ivy League student athletes. So they're still able to recruit because again, like if you're able to go to an Ivy League school and play your sport and you have the capacity to pay for it in terms of your tuition, like that's kind of a hard no. Um, but it's interesting for sure to look at that conference.
Well, speaking about the East Coast, our most viewed episode is with Duke men's basketball and now a Tulane alum, Sion James. And I mean, it was one that we reiterated that the NIL era is true and it's alive. It is very well and alive. We talked about that a lot, but also the opportunity that is aligned with that, right? Like with Sion being a grad transfer, he is utilizing all 5 years of his eligibility, and eligibility nowadays is kind of a tricky topic. We've seen it already with redshirting happening this year. We saw it with UNLV, but then there's all these different things going on with the transfer portal. And it's kind of a mess to the point where I'm even confused what's going on when I talk to close people to me that are asking about how the transfer portal is looking. So, what are we seeing across the nation with that right now?
Eligibility is always a tricky topic. And I think with the COVID year of 5 years is also just like throwing it all for a loop. Plus the red shirting and like the 30% rule, like all of it is just very confusing to begin with. But the NCAA now was current events happening every single day. The NCAA was facing another antitrust lawsuit, this time from the Vanderbilt quarterback, Diego Pavia. So this QB from Vanderbilt, who has now led Vandy to a couple of incredible games this season, he claims the NCAA rules that count JUCO seasons, so the community college seasons if you play there, towards the NCAA eligibility and prohibits athletes from playing a redshirt season after they've played that 4 years. He's saying it violates antitrust laws. QB also is looking for a temporary restraining order to be granted by the District of Tennessee. And like I said, the real time updates, we have some updates already there. News broke the other day saying that this temporary restraining order was denied. So, to me, this lawsuit was interesting because it would question a very big fundamental part of the NCAA and its rules around eligibility. Big part of the NCAA is you're able to compete minus the COVID years, your 4 years tied to your 5 years of like school. And that in terms of you graduating and all of that. So if this were to go through, I think you would see a lot of student athletes um, trying to get more years of eligibility. I think it's also interesting that he tried to do a temporary restraining order also in Tennessee because that happened with the transfer portal and the one time transfer rule. Also, that restraining order happening in Tennessee. So I kind of saw what was happening there. But this also comes around the time of Gable Stevenson being granted his 5th year of eligibility to come back and wrestle at Minnesota. Sorry. So, with Stevenson's situation, his last season was during the 2021-2022 academic year. And since then, he has competed in the Olympics. So, to get this 5th year of eligibility, he utilized his Olympic sport waiver and COVID year of eligibility to return. What I found interesting was that he competed in the WWE and a couple of the pro football like training camps since leaving college. When I read that, I was very confused because the WWE is like a professional wrestling league. So I had to ask around because I just didn't understand how he maintained that amateurism status. But it seems that the NCAA classifies the WWE as a different sport entirely from wrestling, as it's more on like the entertainment side. So I think it's funny that that came out the same day that this temporary restraining order got denied because I feel like you don't hear too much about eligibility until it becomes a big problem. So I'm interested to see what kind of happens there. Dylan Gabriel just broke the all-time touchdown passes, whatever, in FBS history, but he's on like the 6th year of his eligibility. So other people are like, okay, well, the other dude did in like 4. So it's very interesting altogether around eligibility. So I'm interested to see if that ever changes. Um, yeah.
I think it's so wild nowadays because there's injuries, there's a 30% rule, there was a COVID year, all these things to the point where we're literally seeing 7th year and even people asking for an 8th year in college football, which to me is just wild. Like, I cannot even imagine having a 7th or 8th year as a teammate. And I don't know. I mean, it talks about the crazy times. But most importantly, I think just with Sion's episode, it was a reality check for us of what this landscape is actually looking like in real time for high level performing athletes, especially power 4 student athletes, right? It talks about a program such as Duke men's basketball, a player of that caliber that's trying to go to the NBA, what the transfer portal looks like, getting that 6-figure offer. I think it was $850,000 from a coach he's never even met on the first phone call. Like, all these things are wild. And I think that was nice to get that insight from him.
I agree. And I think people also need to realize that these high level deals are happening and they're probably happening on your campus with friends of yours or teammates of yours. I think it's not like we're desensitized to it because we see it in the media, but it's also like you might know people who are going through this. I think it's similar to us being at Cal and there's so many Olympians at Cal and it's kind of just like, oh yeah, like whatever, they're in my class, they're my friend, whatever. But it's like then every Olympic year you see them on TV and you see them win all these gold medals for Team USA. And you're kind of like, oh shit, like I know them. It's the same thing with the NIL situation, just on a kind of different conversation, different level. But I think it was very much so a reality check of this is happening to people that we know, to friends of mine. Like that's crazy to think about.
Yeah, and it's like you normalize seeing the 5-ring tattoo, but then when they're at the White House celebrating those gold medals, it's like, wait a second, that's interesting. So yeah, I totally get that. And just to wrap it back, even these pro rules like the WWE stuff, I was thinking about that for a couple minutes right now. So weird. Like the NCAA is just so weird because yes, that's entertainment, but technically pro. And like I wonder how many sports have that where, like, I guess for soccer it would be if you're a pro indoor soccer player. I wonder what would happen there if you could still play college, like, because it's a different sport technically, like, or a professional futsal player, which is like hardwood soccer. I don't know. That'd be interesting, but
That
it's,
is-
hey, every single day there's a new new example that pops up in the NIL era. So interesting stuff. Let's close out. We promised it last week, and I quite frankly did not do my research, so apologies in advance, but screw it. We'll do this anyways. Elise, basketball predictions. What are we thinking for this year?
I didn't get too creative with mine. I'm kind of a realist in what's happening. So, despite the tough loss last night to Kentucky, my men's basketball pick is still Duke. I gotta support Sion. Um, it was a great game. Also, something that we should definitely talk about in the future. But women's basketball, I'm also going with UConn. They haven't won since like 2016. And I think for that program, that school, that probably feels like centuries ago that they won. So I think they're hungry for it. Paige Beckers, it's her last year. So I'm hoping they get it.
See, yeah, you put me in a rough spot here because from the programs I like and the few players I really know, because it isn't a sport I truly follow in college. I mean, I think it's difficult for me to not say Duke because we literally had C on here. Like I kind of feel messed up, but I don't want to repeat the same pick. So I'll say like Sion just because I mean he was on here. Shout out Sion. I'm gonna give a nice little shout out to my brother's alma mater. I'm gonna go Creighton. I'm gonna go Creighton men's basketball. Little big East pick right there. So we'll go Creighton for men's basketball. For women's basketball, again, I've been following Paige since high school. So it's like after this injury, after everything she's been through, I really want to see her succeed, but I can't do the same pick. Who am I going with? See, top of my head, I want to say, Pac-12 school. I'll go Stanford, but I don't want to say Stanford. I'll go Oregon. We'll see. I don't know. We'll go
Okay.
Oregon and see what happens.
I'm pretty sure Oregon just had a upset over number 12 Baylor women's basketball. So
Yeah.
that was a great one.
Fingers
Great
crossed for the
picks.
former, fingers crossed for the former Pac-12 schools. I wish them the best. It's just can't do the Cardinal.
USC should be good. UCLA should be good. Hopefully,
It'll be
Cal's in
good.
the mix. We'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Which, by the way, let's if anybody watching from Cal basketball would love to have you on and talk about the transfer portal because that's been a huge conversation. So we'll see how the Bears do. But hey, it's been 46 minutes. I think that's enough for us two yapping by ourselves. Yeah, thank you guys for sticking around. This has been episode 21. Pretty big milestone for us to achieve this goal in 21 weeks. So super proud of this. Thank you guys for following along. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, please follow the podcast. Truly means a lot. Share it with friends, share it with loved ones. That's it for today. We will see you all next time.
Bye.